Chapter 216, The Dark Room, 9. Eugene took a moment to placate Carmen. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and Eugene found her face too close for comfort as she demanded that he showed her his flame. After some nagging, Eugene complied with her demands and showed her his flame. "How amazing!" Carmen exclaimed, staring at the purple flame with admiration. Noticing how she was creeping forward and twitching her fingers, Eugene pushed the flame forward for her to see. It wasn't just a differently colored flame. In the first place, the flame created by the white flame formula bloomed from the essence of mana that was refined to the extreme. As such, as long as one stayed faithful to the white flame formula to refine their flame, it was extremely difficult and rare for their flame to transform. However, Eugene's flame was different. Eugene himself could feel that his white flame formula had transformed after his cores were reformed anew. The flame he created using the same refinement process produced a completely different color and power. Ahaha! Carmen burst into laughter as she closely examined the flame resting on her palm. As someone with 7 stars in the white flame formula and the strongest member of the Lionheart family in the current generation, she immediately noticed the change in Eugene's flame. Since Eugene held no hostility towards Carmen, his flame did not bring any harm to her. But for some reason, Eugene felt as if his flame were being devoured, and in fact Carmen was holding his flame firmly in place using her white flame formula. Eugene felt as if his flame would blaze using his mana as firewood if she wasn't holding it in place. This is truly amazing. Many of our ancestors have entered the dark room, but none have experienced a change in their white flame formula like yours, Gilead said with astonishment. It almost made sense that Eugene was stuck in the dark room for 3 days after he saw how Eugene's flame had transformed. What happened in there? Guillaume asked in the middle of his admiration. He could see with his eyes that Eugene's flame had transformed, but he felt another change in Eugene apart from that. As far as he knew, Eugene's skin had always been clean and firm, but now it was practically glowing. He wasn't the only one who noticed this change. Rather, the ones who were most affected by the change were the 2 saints. Christina, give me control of the body for a moment, Anise said urgently. What? Christina was shocked at Anise's intense earnestness. Christina, what are you looking at right now? Raise your head immediately, fix your gaze ahead and look at Hamel, Anise reprimanded. Unfortunately, she couldn't. She really wanted to, but she could not bear to raise her head to see Eugene's face. What was it? It didn't seem like he had changed much, but... no, he had changed a lot. For some reason, his eyes felt calmer, deeper and cooler, and his skin was smooth as if it were coated with honey. His hair, which was usually messy, was still messy, but it looked glossy and even sexy. Sexy, Christina thought involuntarily. How vulgar. Christina's ears flushed bright red. Anise screamed inside her mind, Christina, come on. If you're too shy to look at Hamel properly, immediately give me control of your body. I will take a close look at Hamel's face on your behalf and caress that glossy hair and firm skin. What are you saying? Sister, didn't you say you left behind all material desires and regrets? This is neither of those. As a priestess responsible for Hamel's injuries and his colleague, I have an obligation to identify the mysterious changes he experienced and to prepare for future events. That's something I can do myself. Christina, are you saying you won't surrender the opportunity to be first because you are blinded by your vulgar desires? What do you mean vulgar desires? I'm just worried you might be taken over by lingering feelings, sister, Christina protested weakly. If you are truly worried about me, raise your head and look straight at Hamel this second. Then approach Hamel, grab his face with your hands and look straight into his eyes after getting so close that your lips almost brush against his. Anise was also adamant in her requests. I don't know if there's a reason to go that far. This is as much as I'm willing to give. Quickly, come on. Anise was being sincere. She was truly disappointed that she could not feel his skin, comb his hair and look into his eyes herself. Even so, Anise was more than capable of linking her senses with Christina's, so she was willing to surrender the opportunity as long as Christina gave her this much. In the end, Christina obeyed and hesitatingly approached Eugene. Carmen, Guillaume and Gilead were staring at Eugene with questioning eyes, and Eugene briefly pondered how he would explain the events of the dark room. Naturally, he had no intention of talking about vermouth. Nothing much happened. Just like you all told me, a flame appeared in front of me and then it went inside. What is it? Eugene stopped his explanation and turned towards Christina, who was slowly shuffling towards him. Christina's head was kept low until this point. Anise found this frustrating and decided to prompt her again. However, Christina whipped her head upwards before Anise could call her name. She stared directly at Eugene's face with a light flush. Huh. She took a deep breath, then courageously stretched out her hands and grabbed Eugene's cheeks. Eugene wasn't sure what Christina was doing or if it was even Christina who was in control of her body. What are you doing? He asked since he couldn't call out Anise's name. Christina mustered a little more courage and pushed her face closer to Eugene. Her hands conveyed the soft sensation from their target, and Eugene's transformation was made even more apparent at such a close distance. Christina gulped and stared right into Eugene's eyes. His brilliant golden eyes would shine even in the darkness. His hair, cried Anise, sounding desperate. There was no helping it. Christina had been reluctant because of her embarrassment, but she could not disobey the sister's command. While thinking so, Christina carefully repositioned her left hand behind Eugene's head. Then she gently scratched Eugene's scalp while sweeping through his hair. Everyone was left speechless by her sudden action, and Eugene felt more shocked than anyone else. He felt goosebumps rising on his skin. Was this how a prey felt after being captured by a predator? Eugene immediately took several steps back from Christina. What is it? He stammered. Ehem. Belatedly coming to her senses, Christina cleared her throat before shaking her head. It's a relief. She gave a saintly smile while sweeping her hair with her fingers. There might have been something wrong with your body after not ingesting any food and water for 3 days, right? But from what I can tell from checking Sir Eugene, you are completely fine. Christina gave a convincing reason, and it was also true that she had checked his condition by touching him. This wasn't something to be ashamed of, and when she thought of it that way, it felt as if her flush was fading away. You should have touched his lips too, muttered Anise in disappointment. The image of Eugene's lips fluttered like a mirage in Christina's mind when she heard Anise's words. It had been half a year already, but the texture of the kiss deeply engraved in her mind resurfaced and caused Christina's lips to tingle. Let's pray, Christina said suddenly. Christina found it impossible to raise her head anymore, so she bowed deeply and knelt on the spot. Let's pray to the light for allowing Sir Eugene's safe return and allowing him to overcome the trial of the dark room. No one kneeled in response to her sudden prayer, but Christina continued to pray until the heat of her face cooled completely. Sir Eugene. As soon as the group left the Lionheart family's treasure vault and came up from the basement, Mare shouted while running down the red-carpeted stairs from the main hall, where a large portrait of Vermouth was hanging. Sir Eugene, Sir Eugene, Sir Eugene. Mare looked tearful, and it was obvious why. She had clearly been worried that Eugene had not come out of the dark room for 3 whole days. Eugene took large steps forward and opened his arms wide without saying a word. Mare floundered down and jumped when there were a few steps remaining. She did not use magic at that moment, and Eugene knew well that she was making a silent request with her teary eyes. A thin gust of wind enveloped her, and Mare's small body was guided to Eugene under its care. Mare wrapped her little arms around Eugene before he could. Doesn't it smell? Asked Eugene. It smells like you, Sir Eugene, answered Mare. Not that like a stinky smell, said Eugene. It doesn't, responded Mare with her face buried in his chest. Eugene had worried that the smell of sweat and the impurities would remain even after he washed his clothes with magic, but he sighed with relief after hearing Mare's answer. By the way, Sir Eugene, you've changed a bit. Your chest is softer than usual, commented Mare. What? Your chest was always hard because of your muscles, but now it's soft. Well, it's not super soft, but... Mare paused, then raised her head. Then, after poking Eugene's chest a few times, she buried her face once more. It's more elastic than soft. It's addictive. Eugene had been aware of this fact somewhat. His joints were much stronger than before, and the muscles surrounding them felt more flexible and elastic. His previous bones and muscles had been good enough, but his current body was just perfect. It was better than anything Eugene could have imagined. Mare wasn't the only one who came running. This was the home of the Lionheart family's main branch, so it naturally housed members of the Lionheart family. Cyan crept backward after stopping himself in the middle of the stairs. Behind him was a large portrait of the great founder, Vermouth. It was definitely a shameful thing to be retreating in front of the founder's portrait, but Cyan could not continue forward, for he felt chills as he stared at his sister's back. Cyan didn't even want to imagine his sister's expression. I want to touch him too. Seal's thoughts were quite simple. However, the various ideas derived from this single thought were quite complex. Mayor Meridian, the wicked summon. Had they not gotten along well the last 6 months? They had shared a common enemy in Auxiliary Bishop Christina. Christina was granted access to the entrance of the dark room because she was good at healing magic, while Seal and Mare were ignored. Mare had needed someone to gossip about the two-faced saint, who dared to command her, a personal creation of Sienna the Wise and Eugene who dared to turn his eyes elsewhere. Seal had needed information about what exactly Eugene did in Ura's, as well as information about the saint candidate who tried to act so cutely with her smile. So naturally she did not mind playing nice and going along with Mare's gossip in the process. However, their relationship had always been shallow, weak enough to break with just a little emotion. His look. Mayor Meridian, a 200-year-old summon who only looked like a child on the surface. Wasn't she just an old hag with the skin of a child? How insidious, Seal thought. Mare was practically digging into Eugene's chest with her face buried, and Seal could only see her action as a blatant display of flirtation and a challenge to herself. She wanted to do the same to Eugene if she only had the chance. Elastic chest? Addiction? What the hell is that? Seal was a child of the prestigious Lionheart family, which meant that she had been educated in mannerisms ever since she was a child. It wasn't like she was still an ignorant teenager. How could she do such a clueless, shameful thing as a 20-year-old, especially in the presence of her beloved father, uncle and respected Lady Carmen? Oh dear. Sir Eugene. Christina Rogerus called out. She turned her gaze towards Seal, standing frozen on the stairs. Then, keeping her gaze fixed, she took a step and clasped Eugene's arm. You shouldn't overdo it. You haven't eaten or drank in 3 days, right? Her words were nothing special, only spoken out of concern. She was only helping him for fear of him stumbling. However, Seal did not see it as such. To her, it felt as if time had slowed down. In Seal's eyes, Christina was the opposite of a saint, a wicked woman frolicking with Eugene's arm as she wished. Wait. He hasn't eaten or drank for 3 days. A glimmer appeared in Seal's eyes and her fists stopped quivering. Let's get you back to your room first. Lie down comfortably and I will bring soft food that won't burden your stomach, Christina continued. Ah. However, she was interrupted by Seal's laugh. Time resumed flowing at a normal pace, and Seal continued down the rest of the steps with an elegant gait and approached Eugene. Lady Seal, why are you laughing? Asked Christina with a slight frown. You really don't know anything, do you? You want to feed him soft food when he's starved for 3 days? Seal asked in a mocking tone. He has fasted for too long. Anything else would burden his stomach, retorted Christina. Maybe for a normal person. But that's probably not true for him, Seal said, smiling at Eugene. Ah. And Scylla understood that her only daughter was a black lion, but she did not want her daughter's precious, green youth to be exhausted by hard training. As such, she regularly sent expensive hard-procured cosmetics to Seal to protect her daughter's beauty. So Seal was beautiful and appealing, a fact she was well aware of. But this brat. Was his skin always this clear? Although Seal's skin was spotless and bouncy despite her daily training, she felt insecure when she saw Eugene's skin up close. But she could not hesitate here. Seal smiled as usual and pulled Eugene's wrist. Why you like meat, right? Thick slices of meat. You're lucky. Older sis hasn't eaten anything either. Why are you calling yourself older sis all of a sudden? Asked Eugene. Why not? Doesn't it remind you of our childhood? Lady Carmen, father and uncle. None of you have had anything to eat yet either, right? Asked Seal. I had something to eat earlier. Guillaume stopped himself in the middle of his sentence. He saw Cyan desperately mouthing something at the top of the stairs, as well as a chilling light in Seal's eyes. But my stomach must be working harder than usual. I'm hungry again, all because of you. Guillaume quickly grasped the situation, having taught Seal and Cyan when they were kids. As such, he patted Eugene on the shoulder before continuing. Why don't we all go together? Brother, I mean family head, would that be all right with you? There's no reason to refuse, is there? Answered Gilead. In the end, it was decided that they would eat together at the family dining room, or the Lionheart's dining table to be precise. Christina stopped in her place, knowing that she was a foreigner. "You were too complacent, Christina," Anise mumbled while clicking her tongue. An ordinary person? Both Anise and Christina knew well that Eugene was by no means an ordinary person. It was just that they had wanted to be in his room alone, just them together, and to feed him food. "I won." Seal smiled triumphantly while taking the lead. But instead of following her, Eugene turned to look at Christina. "Can't she just eat with us as well?" he asked. "What?" Seal asked, looking back with disbelief. "Of course she can. It's just that I'm rather worried that the saint candidate might feel uncomfortable," answered Gilead. He wasn't someone who would forbid her from eating with them because she wasn't a part of the family. Just as he said, he had simply been worried that she would feel burdened and uncomfortable eating with the family. "Then why don't we ask her? What do you want to do?" Eugene directed the second question at Christina. What? Christina had not been expecting an invitation. Over the past half a year, Christina had always dined in the dining room prepared for guests. But if she set a precedent today, she could continue to sit at the Lionheart family's table in the future as well. "Christina!" shouted Anise urgently. "Thank you for inviting me," said Christina before bowing her head. Seal's shoulders trembled with anger. Chapter 217. A Signature, 1. In Sienna's mansion within the magic kingdom of Arath. This mansion, which the wise Sienna had actually lived in hundreds of years ago, was treated like a holy land by the many wizards who lived in or were visiting Arath. As a result, the mansion was opened daily as a tourist attraction for 12 hours, from noon until midnight, and was closed to visitors during the early hours of the day. However, even among Arath's countless tourist attractions, this mansion overflowed with tourists every day, so there was no guarantee that one would be able to enter the mansion even if one waited patiently for the entire 12 hours. So the young wizards who could visit the wise Sienna's mansion had usually started waiting in front of the mansion gates from the dawn of the previous day. Even now that was still the case. If one looked out the window, one would see that the wide square outside of the mansion's front courtyard was packed full of wizards' heads. Was that chick Sienna really all that much? Anise muttered to herself in a grumbling tone. She shook her head as she closed the slight gap in the curtains. "No matter how much I think about it, I can't help but feel that Sienna's reputation among the future generation is overblown." 1. "It's not overblown," Mare denied sulkily. "Lady Sienna is such a great person who deserves this much respect. The circle magic formula that Lady Sienna created is said to have advanced the field of magic by 500 years. Little Miss Familiar, if you mumble like that, we won't be able to hear anything. If you want to say something to me, speak louder. Look me straight in the eyes when you speak," Anise instructed as she tilted her head consideringly and stared down at Mare. Mare's shoulders trembled under her cool blue eyes. Mare began crossing her legs and fiddling with her fingers unconsciously, while instead lowering her head even further. Anise snorted at this sight and sat down on the windowsill. "Could you really be that upset that I insulted the mother who gave birth to you?" Anise asked in disbelief. "I know that Sienna is your mother, but before that Sienna and I were very close friends." "Lady Sienna isn't my mother," Mare mumbled hesitantly. Anise scoffed. "Since she created you, what else can you call her but your mother? In any case, whatever I say about my friend is just my personal opinion, so please don't feel the need to argue with me." "You," Mare just pointed instead of saying anything further. Though she had used the word overblown, Anise didn't seriously think that was the case. It was just that Anise found it comical that these young wizards, who were waiting outside her mansion even when it was this early in the morning, were giving such blind respect to Sienna, whom Anise clearly remembered as a bit of a punk. Of course, Anise had also received such respect in Euras. But unlike Sienna, Anise hadn't left behind any teaching materials for her posterity. In the first place, faith was the most important foundation for divine magic, so it was difficult to leave behind any teaching materials for future generations like you could with ordinary magic. So all Anise could do was write down a few lines or passages of scripture for her posterity. Naturally, Anise didn't enjoy having to write down any passages to be recorded in the scriptures. Although the Pope and the cardinals of that time had begged her to write down a few lines, what she had written were really just a few empty lines whose contents were vague and airy without any true intentions or sincerity. The words filled with Anis's sincerity and the truth were actually written down into a children's tale instead of a scripture. Although this is my first time coming here, I feel the same sense of nostalgia as if long ago I visited this place several times, Anis observed. Nostalgia. Mare repeated. Yep. Anis sighed. Back then Sienna was busy with her magic research while I was busy drinking alcohol. Drinking alcohol, Mare mumbled in disappointment. Anis laughed. It's just a joke. Though admittedly not much of one. In any case, both she and I had a lot of eyes on us, and I also had to serve as a symbol of peace and light during that post-war era, so it was hard for me to get away from Ura's. As such, it was rare for me to be able to meet Sienna in person, so most of our communication was done through magic. The distance between Arath and Ura's was large enough that it would take an exceedingly long journey to cross it. And in that era, with the chaos that followed the sudden end of the war, the peace between countries was still unstable. Warp gates had now been opened connecting different countries and cities, but warp gates didn't exist in that post-war era. That made it even more difficult for them to meet each other. As such, Sienna had presented Anis with a crystal ball that she had personally enchanted. Though it had the flaw of requiring large amounts of mana, such a drawback was meaningless for Sienna and Anis. Although it wasn't as often as seeing each other every day, this still allowed them to chat often. They exchanged insignificant gossip and whined to each other. They also shared all the stories they hadn't shared or couldn't share when the five of them wandered around the Devil Dome together. That Hamel was a real asshole. One day Sienna had called Anis while drunk. There was no need to even ask what was going on. Her face was dyed red with intoxication, and she continued to chug huge gulps of alcohol even in the middle of the call. Thinking back on it now, it seemed quite creepy, but Sienna had been crying while rubbing her cheek against the necklace that held Hamel's soul sealed within. She then proceeded to talk a lot about their soul-deceased comrade. Hamel didn't have any family, nor did he have any descendants. Although he might still be remembered in the current time, it was clear that as things stood he would surely be forgotten someday. Anis and Sienna didn't like the thought of that. They considered themselves failures. Although they had sworn to slay all of the Demon Kings, they couldn't kill them all. Sienna and Anis were well aware that the current peace had been obtained due to the whims and mercy of the Demon King of Incarceration. The world was praising the 4 people who had returned from the Demon King of Incarceration's cast as heroes. There were many questions about what had happened in the Devil Dome, what kind of hardships and adversity they had gone through in order to reach the Demon King of Incarceration's castle. No, in order to save the world. But the 4 survivors had never once properly answered such questions. The whole world had praised their journey and its ending as some glorious feat, but for them their journey and its ending were a disgraceful failure. I don't want to write an autobiography. It's condescending and feels like I'm trying to put a nice spin on it. I also don't want to leave the story of my failure for the future generations to read. Niece, how about you? They're preparing a new version of the Scriptures of the Light and they keep saying they want to put my biography into it, calling it the Gospel of Anis. They even want me to include a lot of good words for the future generations. Did you agree to it? Are you insane? They even knelt down in front of me and begged, so I just poured my beer on him and boxed him in the ear. As they were exchanging such stories. How about a fairy tale? Without revealing who wrote it, let's secretly spread it into the world. We'll talk about just how much bullshit we went through in Helmuth. Is this for Hamel's sake? Well, he's already dead, but if we continue to remain silent about it, the people of the world won't even know how he died, right? I don't want Hamel to be forgotten. From then on, Sienna started writing the fairy tale as her hobby and would ask Anis to review the draft for support. Naturally, Anis didn't just read it but instead added more words of her own accord. Then she would return the manuscript to Sienna, who would read it and add even more words. Obviously, the initial purpose of it was to prevent Hamel from being forgotten. It was also to put out their answer to the world of what the hero and his companions had gone through in the Devil Dome of Helmuth. However, somewhere in the middle of all that, a lot of selfish interests and other such rubbish got mixed into it. Thanks to that, he is still remembered as the stupid Hamel even after 300 years have passed, so wasn't it a good thing in the end? Anis thought to herself as she looked around the room. It was a familiar sight. Sienna's room looked just as she had seen it through the crystal ball hundreds of years ago. Sienna had used to study magic or continue writing the fairy tale until late at night with their crystal balls still connected. The place where Sienna had been sitting during those times was where Eugene was currently sitting. Eugene was presently deep in thought as he had Akasha slung over his shoulder. The reason he had left the Lionheart estate and come here to Aroth was to seek advice from Lovelian and the other Tower Masters regarding a signature. A signature was a spell that could be used as a symbol of an archwizard who had reached the 8th circle. It needed to be an original spell created by the archwizard themselves. It was a realization of all the magic they had learned and what they had been pursuing their whole life. A signature was a great spell that the archwizard themselves must be proud of and not something to be used lightly, but if and when it was used, it must be able to create a phenomenon that corresponded to its importance. In the present, the standard for an archwizard was reaching the 8th circle, and Eugene had yet to have reached the 8th circle. However, the ring flame formula that had been conceived by incorporating witchcraft's eternal whole allowed Eugene to perform magic of a much higher rank than his current one. Then there was with this extravagant staff that had been created using an entire dragon heart, and along with Mare's assistance he was able to cast spells up to the 7th circle without any burden. Although 8th circle spells are impossible, Eugene thought. In the first place, a catalogue of 8th circle spells hadn't been clearly established. This was because wizards who had reached such a high level preferred to invent fun spells that were more suitable for themselves rather than casting any generic spells. That was why Eugene wouldn't be able to cast any 8th circle spells, no matter how useful the ring flame formula and Akasha were. It was a simple enough reason. 8th circle spells couldn't be used without first reaching that stage yourself. So no matter how deeply and intricately Akasha enabled him to understand the spell, the circles he created inside his body weren't able to cast such magic. Ugh. He had lost count of how many moans he had let out. Not long after Eugene had overcome the dark room, a letter had arrived from the Red Tower Master in Aroth, Lovelian. The letter had been sent as a polite inquiry to check if he was doing well, and Eugene had included in his reply the news that he had reached the 6th star of the White Flame formula. Then after a few days another letter arrived in return. The letter started with congratulations for his phenomenal achievement and proceeded to ask if he had any spare time to visit Aroth and work on creating his signature. When they received this news from Aroth, Anise had been even happier than Mare to accept the invitation. Her reason was that she wanted to visit Sienna's mansion. This wasn't a very difficult request for Eugene to fulfill. He had been recognized by the royal family of Aroth as the heir of the wise Sienna, so with just a word he could enter the mansion in the early hours of the morning when it was supposed to be closed. While Anise and Mare were taking a look around the empty mansion and reminiscing, Eugene took a seat and started thinking about his signature. A signature, huh? Almost all of the spells that Eugene had used so far had been learned from Akron, and Eugene himself had never once created a spell of his own. Also, Eugene didn't think he had the kind of flair or talent that was needed for such a creation. What about the fact that he was able to learn magic so quickly? That was just because Eugene had been born with the ability to perfectly sense, control, and manipulate mana. It was easy for him to learn the already established spells with this talent, but it wasn't so easy for him to get the hang of creating a new spell that hadn't existed before. But that doesn't mean I can just give up, Eugene continued pondering. He wouldn't have been so ambitious if he didn't have any talent for magic or had never learned any magic in the first place. However, Eugene had already reached the rank just below an archwizard in terms of magic, and because of that he couldn't give up on creating a signature. Naturally, what Eugene wanted wasn't the recognition of being called an archwizard. Eugene was focused on a signature's uniqueness and surprise factor. Although he had heard what the Phantasm of Vermouth had to say, Eugene still wanted to kill all of the Demon Kings, especially the Demon King of Incarceration. In order to get to him, Eugene would first have to reach the Demon King's castle, Babel, and he would then need to climb to the top to enter Incarceration's royal chambers. And like Vermouth had warned him, the Demon King of Incarceration wouldn't just watch quietly as Eugene climbed Babel. But the biggest obstacle to climbing Babel will, of course, be that bastard, the Blade of Incarceration, grumbled Eugene. In his previous life, Hamel had been weaker than the Blade of Incarceration. That was an undeniable fact. But if he could create a viable signature, it would definitely be able to serve as a wild card during his fight against the Blade of Incarceration. And Raizakia. It should come in handy when the time comes to catch that viper bastard as well. The chair that he had been leaning back in tilted upright again. According to Mare, Sienna had laid the foundations of witchcraft in the eternal hole while sitting at this desk and chair in this mansion. Although it wasn't often that he believed in things like superstitions, Eugene had hoped that something might light up inside his head like a sudden stroke of inspiration if he sat here and thought deeply about it. "Hey, Anise," Eugene called out as he shook his head, which was aching from concentrating too hard. "What is it?" Anise, who had been sitting on a nearby windowsill, replied as she turned to look at Eugene. "About the portrait of Sienna that's hanging over there. Don't you think that it looks a bit cheeky?" A large portrait of Sienna was hanging on the opposite wall. It depicted Sienna with an uncharacteristically benevolent smile. Perhaps because his head was crammed full of thoughts about his signature, Eugene couldn't help but feel that that smile was very provocative. "Sienna always looked cheeky," Anise pointed out. "That might be true, but seeing her smile like that feels a bit more unpleasant," Eugene grumbled as he got up from the chair. Since Anise and Mare had already finished looking around the mansion, there was no longer any need to stay here. Before they left the room, Eugene took one more glance at the portrait hanging on the wall. Although this was a sentiment he had already felt many times before, the smile depicted in the portrait felt awkward to Eugene. Although it was true that a benevolent smile like that didn't seem to suit Sienna, Eugene also felt a sorrowful and empty emotion that was uncharacteristic of Sienna in that smile. Eugene's mood worsened whenever he saw this. It made him recall the sight of Sienna's face when Hamel was dying, her tears falling down as she begged him not to die. And it resembled her crying face when they met inside the World Tree when she kept apologizing even though she had nothing to apologize for. "Next time," Eugene muttered to himself in a low voice as he placed Akasha back inside his cloak. He didn't know when it might be, but when they next met, Eugene had the idea that once Sienna was released from the seal, he wanted to come to this mansion with her. He would stand Sienna in front of that portrait and point to it. Eugene wanted to tease her as they looked at that stupid smile together. "Where are you going now?" Anise asked. "To the Red Tower of Magic," Eugene answered. "But since there's no reason for us to go there together, you can go find another inn too." Anise interrupted him. "But there's no real reason for us to separate now, is there? Could it be that Aratha's towers of magic are so miserly that they don't even have a single room they can lend to foreign guests? If we ask, then he should lend us one." But Eugene stopped grumbling as he saw something ahead of them. They had left the mansion and started walking down the street while it was still mostly night. Pentagon was the capital city of Arath, which was called the Magic Kingdom. The view of these streets illuminated at night was beautiful enough to be called a tourist attraction in and of themselves. But currently, it was early in the morning, so the only light that was illuminating the street was a pale streetlight. Below that streetlight, a woman was standing there wearing a coat that was so large that its hem touched the ground. Her eyes were covered by a butterfly-shaped mask, and then she had worn a mask below it to make for an even more suspicious appearance. Eugene stood there dumbfounded as he stared at the woman. Mare, who had been walking beside him instead of getting into his cloak, tugged on Eugene's sleeve. What on earth could she be doing standing there? Mare asked him. "Pretend you don't know her," Eugene instructed as he immediately turned around. In order to get to the Red Tower of Magic, they needed to go in the direction of where the woman was standing, but Eugene thought it would be less of a bother to just go around her than to be caught by that half-witted crazy woman. "Why are you ignoring me?" the woman suddenly cried out as she ran out from beneath the streetlight. The identity of this woman was Melkith El-Haya, the White Tower Master. Melkith continued, "Lionheart brat, I'm talking to you. Of course, I knew you wouldn't be surprised by my identity. You're extremely sharp, so I knew that you would recognize me no matter what disguise I had on. But don't you think you're going too far by just ignoring me? Then how on earth were you expecting me to react to you?" Eugene demanded exasperatedly. "White Tower Master, what in the world are you doing here? Couldn't you have asked me something like that? Then I could have laughed, taken off my mask, and shown you the joke I had prepared," Melkith said as she lifted her butterfly mask up slightly and glanced at Eugene. She still hadn't lowered the mask that she was wearing on the bottom half of her face as she asked, "Aren't you curious about what kind of joke I had prepared?" "No, I'm not curious at all," Eugene easily denied. "Can't you at least pretend to be curious?" "I don't want to." Eugene continued to stride forward without even looking at Melkith. Melkith felt like her insides burning up at his callous reaction, but she didn't give up and even used a spell to block Eugene's way forward. "Am I pretty?" Malkith asked as she tilted her head to the side and lowered her mask. Her lips were torn open on both sides. No, they just looked like they had been torn. It was truly an unnecessarily realistic illusion. Neither Eugene nor Mare nor Anise showed any reaction to Malkith's face. In this early morning under the pale streetlights, it had been boring to just wait there silently, so Malkith had prepared a joke that she thought matched well with this dreary autumn atmosphere, but Malkith just stood there silently for a few moments before she erased the illusion on her cheeks with a light flick of her finger. She then changed her expression as if to pretend that nothing had happened. "I am the White Tower Master, Malkith Al-Haya." Malkith introduced herself with a confident smile as she offered a hand to Christina. "I've heard a lot about you as Yura's Saint candidate. It's a pleasure to meet you." Currently, the one controlling Christina's body was antsy. She just stared at Malkith without a single trace of amusement on her face. Anise didn't have the slightest desire to understand what kind of joke Malkith had just attempted to pull. However, she was wary of the fact that Malkith's appearance was quite beautiful and that Malkith had openly approached Eugene and tried to pull a joke on him. But while Anise might be wary of Malkith, she wouldn't immediately expose this fact. Anise's personality wasn't that shallow. "It's nice to meet you too," Anise responded to Malkith's greeting with a broad smile on her previously expressionless face. Eugene finally asked, "What are you doing here? With that look, it doesn't seem like you're just out taking a walk at night. Why would you ask something so obvious?" Malkith scoffed. "I was waiting for you. That's why I was asking. Why are you waiting for us here?" Eugene insisted exasperatedly. "I've heard the news from the Red Tower Master. You're trying to create a signature, right?" Malkith asked with a proud smile as she leaned over to Eugene. "But a signature isn't something you can create just because you've decided you want one, right? So, that is why this archwizard and super spirit summoner you big sis Malkith will help you." "No need," Eugene cut her off before she could finish. "Hey, how stubborn. What's so bad about getting some help from an adult?" Malkith pouted. "Isn't it obvious?" Eugene said with a shrug. "There's no way you would offer me a gift without any strings attached, Lady Malkith. 3. So what is it that you want from me now? Just what in the world do you see me as, huh? I really wanted to help you out of the goodness of my heart," Malkith righteously claimed. "Liar. You're going to request something from me later on the pretext that you helped me now, aren't you? You've already used the excuse of teaching the elves magic to visit the forest in our estate regularly, so what else do you want?" Eugene demanded as he narrowed his eyes and glared at Malkith. "Didn't I say that it's not that?" Malkith fired back. "I just want to help you. Do you really think I'm always trying to get something from you? As your distant senior, I just want to help out a junior wizard." Eugene still insisted doubtfully, "There's no way it's... If I had to say something, then I can't deny that I have the slight desire to dye your signature with my color. Won't that make it easier for me to get some benefits from your reputation in the future? As the kind senior wizard who helped the archwizard Eugene Lionheart develop his signature, is what I mean," Malkith said with a sly smile as she poked Eugene in the side with her elbow. Her personality and behavior might be a bit strange, but Malkith herself wasn't fundamentally a bad person, or at least that's what Eugene thought. Her behavior isn't just strange. It's crazy. Aside from her talent as a spirit summoner, this human named Malkith Al-Haya is the shame of all spirit summoners. Tempest grumbled his opinion inside Eugene's head. Chapter 218. A Signature 2. Most wizards' biological clocks were broken with the days and nights reversed. As such, most towers of magic, including the Red Tower of Magic, didn't impose any curfews. Of course, there was a strict security system for entering the tower, but Eugene, as a disciple of the Tower Master, wasn't impeded by this security system. "What are you doing here?" asked the Red Tower Master Lovelian Sophies. While he was happy to reunite with his disciple after such a long time, Lovelian was still taken aback by the sight of Malkith standing beside Eugene without any apparent compunctions. Blatantly furrowing his brow, Lovelian scanned Malkith from head to toe. "Did you drink too much during the night? But no matter how much you drank, you must have confused the Red Tower of Magic with the White Tower of Magic. I'll immediately contact the White Tower of Magic and summon a wizard to take you home," Lovelian offered. "Red Tower Master, why are you acting like that when it's just us?" Malkith said with a pout. "No way. Are you joking with me right now?" "Sorry, since it's so rare to see you joking around, It seems that I'm having trouble understanding. Lovelian quickly clarified. I'm telling you to go back home. Oh come on, not again. There's no need for such harsh words between friends, Melkith said in a cutesy tone as she shot Lovelian a playful wink. At this wink, Lovelian staggered a few steps backward with a disgusted look on his face. Still, the fact that he didn't deny the words, between friends, was proof that Lovelian was also one of the few wizards with unusual personalities. After clearing the disgust from his expression, he turned to Christina and introduced himself with a welcoming smile. I'm sorry for the late greeting. My name is Lovelian Sophies, the current master of the Red Tower of Magic. Then Christina also replied to his greeting with a faint smile and a slight bow of her head. My name is Christina Rogerus. Lovelian politely inquired, how would you like me to address you? As far as I'm aware, you still hold the position of Auxiliary Bishop of the Alcarty Parish. So shall I call you by your title as the Auxiliary Bishop? Or else, would you prefer for me to call you the Saint Candidate? It should be announced soon, but I have already stepped down from my position as the Auxiliary Bishop of Alcarty, Christina informed him. Also, the title of Saint Candidate sounds a bit overly polite for casual conversation. In that case, would it be all right with you if I called you Lady Christina? It would be my honor for the Red Tower Master of Aroth to address me by my name, and I would be very thankful for it. Melkith, who had been quietly listening to their conversation, waved her hand in front of her face and tilted her head towards Eugene. Phew, don't you think such a conversation is a bit too polite? I think it might be that Lady Melkith is the one who's a bit too lacking in respect for others, Eugene opined. I am a person who prefers to show her respect through actions instead of words. Melkith defended herself as she threw her head back with a laugh. There was no way that Lovelian wouldn't hear her mutters. He glared at Melkith with open irritation in his narrowed eyes, only for Melkith to pretend not to notice and point at the floor with her finger. Red Tower Master, I heard that your disciple is planning to start creating his own signature? As a wizard and his senior, I also plan to provide some support, so let's head straight down to the labs right away, Melkith suggested. What are you saying now after coming here so early in the morning? Lovelian complained. In any case, it's not like we're going to sleep right now, is it? Is there any reason for us to procrastinate? The underground research laboratories of the Red Tower of Magic are said to be especially sturdy, so let's go take a look, Melkith proposed eagerly, but Eugene had no intention of granting her wishes. Although he wouldn't be tired out even if he stayed up all night, Eugene felt that that wasn't any reason not to get some sleep. Melkith squawked in protest, but Eugene and Christina just went to their allocated rooms and got some late rest. As I've always said, young people these days don't know how to cherish their time. They don't even need to rest, so why go and get some sleep? It's just a waste of time, Melkith scolded. Eugene yawned. You really do speak like an old-timer. Melkith yelped. An old. As your senior wizard, I will give you some advice that you should make sure sticks in your head. 1. Talking like that just makes you sound even more of an old-timer. When Eugene teased her like this, Melkith had to grit her teeth as her two fists trembled in anger. Who are you to call someone old-timer? Mare, whose head was the only thing sticking out from a hole in Eugene's cloak, resisted the urge to roast Eugene with these words rolling around inside her head and could only pout her lips instead. In Mare's view, the way Eugene looked during the times he regularly motivated Cyan back at the main estate more than qualified him to be called an old-timer, and the things that a niece would sometimes say after arbitrarily controlling Chrysitna's mouth didn't leave her far behind. Do you have any preliminary ideas for your signature? Lovelian asked as he led them somewhere that wasn't deep underground. As Melkith had said, the Red Tower of Magic's basement laboratories were extremely sturdy, and in the past, when Eugenie was still living in the Red Tower of Magic, he had also made use of them several times. However, no matter how sturdy a Tower of Magic's research laboratories were, if Eugene decided to fully unleash his mana, they would be destroyed even if he didn't cast a spell or use any sword force. As Lovelian was also well aware of this fact, he instead led Eugene to the rooftop of the Red Tower of Magic instead of the underground research laboratories, which held the risk of collapsing. This open rooftop area served as Lovelian's research area and practice room. Truthfully speaking, I'm not sure where to even start thinking about it, Eugene admitted. He had given it a lot of thought but nothing in particular came to mind. Lovelian grinned and pulled a staff out from within his robe. With a light swing of his staff, he raised something like a transparent curtain that encircled the rooftop. He had cast a spell so that no one would be able to observe what was happening on the rooftop from the outside. Sir Eugene, due to your special circumstances, I felt that it would be even more likely for you to face such a problem, Lovelian readily admitted. Special circumstances? Eugene repeated. Lovelian nodded. Yes, there have been several warriors in this continent's history who could also use magic, but most of them have been pretty lackluster, both in their skills as a warrior and as a wizard. Although they got some use from mixing the two skill sets, even speaking generously, they could hardly be called first class. That is, except for the ancestor of the Lionheart clan, the Great Vermouth. Lovelian was telling the truth. All of the archwizards who had existed throughout history had been people who had solely walked on the path of magic with a single-minded focus. Similarly, those who had made a name for themselves as knights or warriors were the ones who had devoted their whole lives to either combat or martial arts. The people of the world are currently pointing to you, Sir Eugene, and calling you the second coming of the Great Vermouth. I also agree with them. In fact, though you just reached the 6th star of the White Flame formula at this young age, this only means that you've reached the level of being able to freely cast the spells of the 7th circle, correct? Lovelian accurately assessed. Well, yes, Eugene humbly confirmed it. Lovelian nodded. That's why you're having such a hard time coming up with something, Sir Eugene. Eugene tilted his head to the side, unable to understand what Lovelian meant by these words. It was Lovelian who had taught Eugene the basics of magic and had broadened his foundation. While he couldn't be compared to Sienna, no one could deny that Lovelian was an exceptional wizard. So when such an archwizard directly said that Eugene would have a hard time with something like this, he couldn't just take those words lightly. Where would you say the difficulty comes from? Eugene asked politely. The essence of magic is finding ways of doing things that you're unable to do, Lovelian replied with a smile. As he thrust his staff forward, a whirlwind of flames began to churn out of the end of his staff. People can't just spray fire out of their hands without using a tool. However, if they use magic, they can start a fire all by themselves. In the end, that's what magic is all about. It's a skill that enables you to do what you cannot do. Eugene listened to Lovelian without interrupting him. Ending the demonstration, Lovelian continued. If I had to put it in simpler terms, I'm not able to fly in the sky. However, if I use magic, I am able to fly up into the sky. If I just run normally, I'll be slower than a dog, let alone a horse, but if I use magic, I can move faster than anyone else. I wondered what you were trying to say. Melkith, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up with a chuckle and raised a finger. Now then, take a look at this, kid. I'm not a warrior and I don't even have a core. Although I'm able to manipulate the mana inside my body, I can't manifest a sword force like warriors or knights can. However, if I use magic, I can make a blade of mana that's similar to sword force even if it's based on slightly different principles, no? Aha, Eugene understood what the two were trying to say. Eugene wasn't an ordinary wizard. If he needed a sharp blade or a powerful attack, he didn't need to wring out a new formula and cast a spell. He could just manifest his sword force. If he wanted to run fast, he didn't need to use any speed-related spells. He just needed to start operating the White Flame formula and run. His distinction between what could be done and what could not be done was different from ordinary wizards. That's why you're having such a hard time with it, Lovelian emphasized. Sir Eugene, for an archwizard, the signature is the essence of all the magic they've accumulated over a lifetime of practice and research. Usually, after studying magic for decades, they specially tailor a spell that best suits themselves. Melkith interrupted him impatiently. In conclusion, Brat, it's true that you're a strong wizard, but as a wizard you're also really flawed. So far you've never once properly conceived your own spells, and you've never even felt the need to do so, right? The answer was undeniable. Even in his previous life, Eugene had been a warrior. The same went for the life he had led after being reincarnated. He knew that magic was both convenient and strong, but his magic had never once been the main focus in the battles that Eugene had fought thus far. Seeing as this was the case, he had never researched any new spells, nor had he felt the need to do so. Well, that's true, Eugene eventually admitted. To be honest, I find it more comfortable to fight directly with my body than to use spells. However, it's not like you don't use any magic at all, right? Melkith prompted him. At the very least, it's overwhelmingly more efficient to use a spell when you need to fly through the air. Eugene nodded thoughtfully. Yes. And apart from that, when I need to attack my enemies from a distance, and I also often use blink to mix up my movements. I also like to use spatial magic to create diversions. The more he talked, the more Eugene's expression twisted into a grimace. No matter what angle he considered it from, Eugene thought that wasn't something that he should admit to in front of Lovelian, who had helped him a lot ever since he was young, who had accepted him as a disciple, taught him magic, and had always been on his side. Although he couldn't tell what his master's inner thoughts were, didn't most teachers want their teachings to be valued by their disciples? That means to you, Sir Eugene, magic is only really used as an aid in battle, Lovelian assessed thoughtfully. Eugene meekly responded, yes. I'm sorry. Why are you apologizing? Lovelian asked as he tilted his head with a puzzled expression. Eugene awkwardly cleared his throat and snuck a peek at Lovelian's reaction before replying, well, you're the one who taught me most of the magic I know, Master. But doesn't this feel like I'm neglecting the magic you taught me? Anise, who was watching through Christina's eyes, felt quite pleased by this current situation. Hamel, who always seemed so violent and rambunctious, was filled with a curious concern in front of this neatly trimmed wizard. On top of that, Hamel had even called him master. Though it was only natural for a disciple to be respectful towards his teacher, it was something that Anise couldn't imagine Hamel doing in his mercenary days. I'm the one who raised him into this, Anise whispered to Christina with a sense of pride and fulfillment. She wasn't lying. From the moment that Hamel had joined them as a comrade, Anise had spent a long time correcting his behavior and thoughts. His dirty mouth, which was the most problematic, had always resisted being corrected in the end, but since it seemed like he was worried about insulting his master, this could be called a successful result. Sir Eugene, how one uses one's magic is entirely up to the wizard in question, Lovelian said with a grin after understanding what Eugene was trying to say. While it's clear that I'm the one who taught you magic, that doesn't mean I need you to become a pure wizard, Sir Eugene. In fact, I would prefer it if you didn't become such an ordinary wizard. Because it would be a waste of your talents if you were to solely be a wizard, Sir Eugene. Eugene coughed in embarrassment. Ahem. Noticing his embarrassment, Lovelian changed the subject. Sir Eugene, I've already said this earlier, but a signature is the essence of all the magic that a wizard has accumulated through practice and research. What's most important is what type of magic the wizard himself has mainly been dealing with. In Eugene's case, that was spells that assisted him in combat. Sir Eugene, you don't need to use magic for your attacks. Because rather than needing to use spells to attack, you are capable of creating stronger attacks without them. If combat assistance is all that you require, that is more than enough. That's all you need to determine the direction of your signature, Lovelian advised. Once you've decided on a direction, you just have to work out a basic technique and then build it up. Magic is used to create a phenomenon that doesn't happen naturally, like lighting a spark in heavy rain or causing a blizzard in midsummer. So all you need to do is come up with a technique that can create such unnatural phenomena. Melkith picked up the topic with a chuckle as she took off the coat that she was wearing. Since you won't get a good understanding if we just keep talking about it, allow this arch-wizard and great spirit summoner, Lady Melkith Alhaya, to show you my signature. You should be honored to know that of all the people who have seen my signature, only a few have survived. Lovelian punctured her pretense, but it's not to the extent that it's all that rare. The other Tower Masters and Lord Tremple have also seen your signature. Stop saying such useless things and ruining the atmosphere when I'm trying to show off. Melkith shot a glare at Lovelian before firming up her expression. Kid, as you may already know, I am the greatest spirit summoner in the history of this continent. I've made contracts with the Spirit King of Lightning and the Spirit King of Earth. So in my case, my signature naturally has something to do with my spirits. The name of this technique is... As Lovelian already knew what Melkith's signature was, he quickly withdrew backward. He also gestured to Eugene and Christina to follow his example. While Eugene followed the order and retreated, he kept looking at Melkith curiously as she stood proudly in the center of the tower's rooftop. Melkith called out the name of her technique, Elemental Fusion Trinity Force. A light flashed from Melkith's eyes. Boom. In an instant, black thunderclouds had formed in the skies above the red tower of magic. Formidable amounts of mana engulfed Melkith's body. Then the entire land surrounding the red tower of magic began to rise. Melkith's body rose up until she was standing high in the sky. The earth that rose up from below wrapped around Melkith's body and began to form a particular shape. Boom! Sparks flew as lightning from the thunderclouds coiled around the shape being formed from the earth. Eugene, Mare and Christina were all at a loss for words as they watched this scene. Melkith's figure could no longer be seen. No, could it really be called unseen? The shape that appeared in the skies above the Red Tower of Magic was a giant Melkith Elhaya that had been made out of the soil. If someone had to describe it, it looked like someone had sculpted a giant doll of her out of clay. Although it was made up of earth, it didn't really have the color of dirt. This was the elemental fusion Trinity Force. It looked as if Melkith had just become a giant. Of course, this wasn't the body of the real Melkith. Melkith stayed in the center of this gigantic earthen doll, and by linking her mind to the earthen doll's body, she was able to control it perfectly. Crouching in the air, Trinity Force, the giant Melkith, opened its mouth and asked, "Well, how is it?" Its smile was exactly the same as that of the smaller human version of Melkith. "I'm talking about this voluptuous body made of dirt. It's a perfect recreation of my body's 3 sizes. I can also freely change its outfit to whatever I wish," Melkith revealed. The 3 spectators on the rooftop couldn't say anything in response to Melkith's proud statements. "Those aren't the only great things about my signature," Melkith continued excitedly. "This body is no different from an incarnation of the Earth Spirit King, so while in this state I can control the earth to my heart's content. And all the energy required to move this gigantic body is supplied by the power of the Lightning Spirit King." Melkith stretched out one giant hand in a demonstration. As she snapped its index finger and thumb, a formidable force of lightning gathered at the fingertips. "Fufufu. In the form of Trinity Force, I might be able to crush the Abram Royal Palace with just one gesture of my finger, no?" Melkith trailed off thoughtfully. "It's fortunate that Lord Tremple isn't here to hear that," Lovelian commented dryly. Melkith defended herself. "Not even I would say something like that in front of the old man who's extremely loyal to the royal family, you know?" "Then stop talking nonsense and get down here," Lovelian impatiently instructed. "White Tower Master, I've already said this in the past, but while it's undeniable that your signature is outstanding and impressive, its outer appearance is disturbing." "That's my face you're talking about," Melkith roared back. "But there's no need to make it in your own image, right?" "I'm not afraid to love myself," Melkith declared. The huge Melkith formed a cradle with her hands and rested her chin on it in a cute pose. Lovelian just made a disgusted expression and turned his gaze away from the sky. "Its outer appearance might be disturbing, but I think the White Tower Master's signature will serve as a good example for you," Lovelian reluctantly admitted. "It is the essence of all the magic she has accumulated over the years and the embodiment of her ideals." As Eugene scanned Trinity Force while holding Akasha, he found himself agreeing with Lovelian's words. An elemental fusion, this definitely wasn't a wrong description. Melkith had used herself as the center of the fusion to combine the Spirit King of Earth with the Spirit King of Lightning. It was close to impossible to create such an existence with just mana, so she had formed a body out of soil with the power of the Earth Spirit King and then used the lightning of the Lightning Spirit King as its power source. With that, Melkith was able to fully deploy the strength of both Spirit Kings while also supplementing them with her own magic. "It's unfair that I'm the only one showing off my secrets, Red Tower Master. Aren't you going to show yours as well?" Melkith goaded. Lovelian huffed. "I was going to show them even without you pressing me." After drawing a sufficient distance away from Eugene, he formed a hand sign with both hands. "Pantheon," Lovelian called out. There was no need for any long incantations of complex spell formulas with his signature. The Red Tower Master, Lovelian's specialty was summoning magic. So his signature, Pantheon, wasn't a spell that caused any phenomena, like the signatures of other archwizards, but instead was a spell that summoned creatures. Thanks to that, Lovelian's Pantheon had the advantage of overwhelming speed. In contrast, Melkith's Trinity Force couldn't help but require a lot more time for chanting and application. The same went for the signatures of other archwizards as well. However, Lovelian's signature could summon a door from a different dimension just by forming a hand sign and calling out the name Pantheon. Boom! A huge door fell from the sky. The door was covered in complex engravings. In the past, after Eugene's duel with Jen Eric had ended, Jen Eric, who had refused to accept the outcome of the duel, restrained his hostility the moment that Lovelian descended onto the scene with Pantheon. That was just how unorthodox and terrifying Pantheon was. While overwhelming speed was one of its strengths, another strength that Pantheon had when compared to other signatures was its randomness and unpredictability. This door itself is a summoning object that I've spent my whole life creating, Lovelian said as he stroked the iron gateposts of Pantheon, which was towering beside him. And contained within the secondary dimension that's connected to this door are all the summoning creatures and summoning objects that I've either collected or created throughout my life. This included everything from an ancient monster that had been lurking in a dungeon deep underground to a supreme hybrid that was created by crossbreeding several different monsters, the chimera, or even a curse whose true form had been sealed away within a magic book, etc. It wasn't just living things either. Summoning objects like the golems created by Lovelian and other wizards of the Red Tower of Magic, and other non-living monsters that could move on their own were also kept dormant within Pantheon. Only I know what summoning creatures and summoning objects will emerge from this door. By opening this door, I can create a large army by freely summoning all of my summoning creatures and summoning objects. However, that alone isn't enough to explain the pride I have in my signature, Lovelian said with a bright smile as he turned to look at Eugene. I'm able to freely combine the summoning creatures and summoning objects stored within this door. To put it simply, I can create a chimera from any of the materials stored within the door. Depending on what combination I come up with, the purpose it's meant to be used for will change, along with the power of the summoning creature itself. That's why the Red Tower Master's Pantheon is so hard to deal with. You never know what might come out of that door, but the power of the synthesized creatures made by combining his existing summons is completely unpredictable, Melkith said as she dispelled Trinity Force and leaped down from the sky. The most terrible thing about it is that there are really no restrictions on the combination of the objects stored within Pantheon. So, that means he could mix 100 different summoning objects with 100 different summoning creatures in order to create a single creature that has all of their combined strengths. I've never done something like that. I've never wanted to do so, nor have I ever desired an opportunity that would require me to do so, Lovelian said with a wry smile as he banished Pantheon back. As you can see, my Pantheon is the pursuit of my heights as a summoner. I hope my signature will be of use to you, Sir Eugene. Pantheon and Trinity Force, Eugene mumbled to himself as he considered these spells. Do you have to come up with the name of our signature yourself? Huh. Lovelian grunted. Eugene elaborated. I was wondering if you might be willing to come up with a name for me, Master. What are you talking about, kid? The signature is the crystallization of a wizard's knowledge and the realization of their ideals. Of course, it should be named by yourself. Melkith fired off an objection with a confused expression. That was something Eugene also understood. However, Eugene wasn't very confident in his ability to name things. Ignition, Mare whispered. And Azura Rampage. I'll kill you, Eugene immediately threatened. Eclipse, Mare continued unabated. Eugene's expression twisted into a scowl as he pinched Mare's cheeks. It hurts, Mare whined. Don't lie. You can't feel pain, Eugene pointed out. It hurts in my heart. After saying something like that, how could anyone who called themselves a human bear to keep pinching her? Eugene quietly let go of Mare's cheeks. Mare continued to give her opinion. However, Sir Eugene, I think that the name Eclipse is pretty cool. Didn't you come up with that name after giving it a lot of thought? It's also similar to the real thing. Dyeing the sun black like a solar eclipse. Unable to endure listening to any more of this, Eugene stuffed Mare's head back into his cloak. What's eclipse? Melkith tilted her head to the side and asked, but Eugene clamped his lips shut tightly. Still, it seems that Eclipse is better than Azura Rampage or Dead End, Eugene admitted to himself in his heart of hearts.